Hello and welcome to the Xtra Edge, a sports analytics podcast powered by KINEXON Sports. I'm Dave Grinjinski, and today we're talking with Eric Donoval, who is the Director of Sports Performance for Football at the University of Wyoming, the home of the Cowboys out there in Laramie, Wyoming. Coach, first of all, thank you for taking some time to join us here on the Xtra Edge.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me on. It's always good to speak with you guys.
Well, I know since you rode into town from LSU, and I'm assuming it was on a horse since you're out in Wyoming, right? You came in from LSU, and ever since you've been there, you've helped this team reach 4 bowl games, including 3 straight. And you're coming off a 9-4 season that ended with a win in the Arizona Bowl over that perennial power in the MAC, Toledo. That was one heck of a game. I watched that game, Coach. Now, this is where I start to wonder, how much did the data play a role? Because on this podcast, we talk about coaches using data, gaining insight, and then taking action based on what they learned. So let's start with the data first, Coach. And more specifically, let's start with you. When did you start using data and why?
Yeah, so really my first exposure to GPS would have been way back in 2010, 2011. And I was currently at LSU, so I was working under Coach Tommy Moffitt, and he brought these GPS units in, and they were Catapult at the time. They were the Minimax S5s. I mean, it was the most primitive version. We had never heard of anything like that. And Coach Moffitt actually said, you know, this is going to be the future of where strength and conditioning is going, at least a critical component of it. And so he strapped us up with GPS. We went out, and it was summertime, and we went out on the turf, and it was probably 100 degrees, 100% humidity. And Coach Moffitt just broke us off like, oh, I run 100 yards. Oh, I do a bear crawl. I do a tire flip. Do a shuffle, and we're accumulating all this data, and we had no clue what we were doing or why we were doing it. And so, you know, going back 14 years is really when I was first exposed to GPS. And then at LSU, we continued to use it. We used Catapult for a while, and then we moved to Polar Team Pro, and we used that for the duration that I was there. So I was there about 8 years, and we were consistently using some type of tracking system. And then when I got to Wyoming, we had Polar for a while, and then we obviously switched over to KINEXON. So I've had exposure to multiple different systems. We've been doing it for a really long time. Obviously, the metrics and the technology has evolved over the past 14 years significantly, but we've been using some type of tracking system upwards of 14 years now.
So what would you say, you know, you mentioned the KINEXON GPS, and I know you guys use a combination of LPS and GPS, but let's start here. What would you say, how much has the GPS changed from back in the days when you were first exposed to it?
Yeah, I think, you know, number one, you can go to the reliability of it, the accuracy of it, and that's certainly taken a step forward in the past years. And just the ability to extract the data in a timely fashion, I feel has significantly increased or gotten better. So the ability to take that information in a timely fashion and then start analyzing it and articulating that to the coaches, that's taken a step forward. Really, the LPS is where, you know, that's been a huge advantage for us here. You know, we're up in the mountains up here. We're at 7,200 feet. You know, it snowed last weekend. It was like a blizzard, and it's April. And so the majority of our training has really moved inside. In the winter, it's just where it has to be. And so for us to take the LPS system and get the accuracy of a GPS system inside has really been important for us. And so that's been a huge component in our winter training this year.
So that's the big advantage. So the GPS you're taking outside, and an LPS, the location positioning is for your indoor work, and then you get both and you don't miss a beat on the metrics that you're collecting.
Yeah, that's correct. And we do a lot of split practices here. So we'll have our offense in the stadium, we'll have our defense in the indoor. And so the ability to mesh all that data and integrate it into one whole session has been really, really big. In the summertime, we're outside for, I would say, 90% of the time, unless it's raining. In the wintertime, we're inside 100% of the time. And so the ability to go inside, outside, and transition and not miss a beat with getting accurate information and data, that's been really, really critical for us just because of our location in the country and how we implement practice here.
Well, and does LPS tell you anything differently from the GPS or vice versa?
No, it's going to give us the exact same metrics, which is a huge component for us. Rather than just getting a workload or an accumulated acceleration load outside and inside, this gives us a much more detailed depiction of what we're doing with distance and high-speed yardage and XLs and decels. All those are critical components and pieces to our analysis with the tracking system. So we get everything inside that we would get outside, and I believe it's accurate to 10 centimeters, and so we're not worried about the accuracy.
Yeah, and are those, and I always like to ask people what their top 3 metrics are. I like to call it the metrics trifecta. I stole it from our NBA guy, Phil Lieneman. But do you have a metrics trifecta, like a top 3 that you're looking at every single day?
I would say it actually goes well beyond 3. So if I were to give you my top 3, the trifecta, it would be workload, which is accumulated acceleration load, distance, and high-speed yardage. Now, we're going to go much more beyond that. We're going to look at XLs and decels. We're going to look at top speed. We're going to look at mechanical load. And we're going to look at the density of practice in 3 different ways. We're going to look at density for yardage, density of workload, and density of mechanical load. And so that's going to give us a 360-degree depiction of the tax on the athlete from a yardage standpoint, from a mechanical standpoint. All those things are going to play a role in our analysis of the overarching workload of our team or our positions or our individuals.
Well, I know you're big on speed. I heard you say you're building bullets, not bowling balls. And, and I know you have 8 guys that could run over 22 miles per hour, which is pretty odd to put together a track team maybe in the summer. But does the data help you with that? Help you train faster players?
It really does. Number one, and there's multiple aspects to this answer to this question with the top speed. Number one is we want to make sure, especially in the off season, like you're talking winter and summer, that we're slowly exposing these guys to higher velocities. Like we're not going to come out the gates and rip a 30+10 fly week 1. And so the top speed allows us to progressively expose these guys to higher velocities through a progressive approach through the week. So that's number one. Number two, it drives competition within our team. Our guys understand top speed. There's certain metrics that we share with our team. There's certain metrics we do not share with our team, and it's strictly between the sports performance staff and the coaching staff. But top speed is one that our guys understand that. They're competitive with it. We put leaderboards up with it. And so it drives intent of our speed days as well. And then really from an in-season standpoint, the top speed is going to be really important because we want to monitor what threshold these athletes are touching each week of their top speed capability. And, I think it's a well-known fact that speed starts to decay anywhere between 3 to 8 days. So it's 5 days plus or minus 3. And so in season, we want to track these guys' top speed. We want to track what % they're hitting of their top speed and make sure we're exposing them once a week to an intense bout of sprinting so they maintain those qualities. So top speed is something that we monitor year round for multiple different reasons, but it's a critical piece to our tracking.
Would you say that's the aspect of the game that collecting data helps the most, or is it load management, calculating momentum? Like what is it? Would you say that that's where it helps you the most with speed?
I would say, it depends on the time of the year. We take a pretty comprehensive approach in our analysis, and I rattled off probably 10 metrics. We like to keep it 10 or under. We certainly don't want to get any paralysis by analysis with it. We like to keep it to the big rocks, but really the tracking helps us for multiple reasons. Number one is we've been using tracking systems for a long time now. We've been using KINEXON specifically for 2 years now. And so we've accumulated data on what practice is, what a week of camp is, what it looks like for a wide receiver, what it looks like for an offensive lineman. And so the ability to quantify those things and then progressively expose our athletes to certain thresholds of certain metrics prior to camp is important to make sure they're ready for the demands of the game. So that's a really critical piece. The main metrics we're going to look at for that is going to be high speed yardage. We want to touch 100% of what the average week of camp is in that last week of summer, so they're prepared for those sprinting volumes. We want to touch about 50% of total yardage. There's no way we're going to get the amount of total yardage in training that we would in a week of camp. 50% is kind of a threshold that we found to be adequate enough for them to be prepared. And then we want to push around 75 to 80% of their workload. And so from an off-season standpoint, if we back it up to square one, is being able to quantify and objectify what practice is, what the first week of camp's going to be, and then make sure we're exposing them to certain thresholds. That's a really critical piece. And then in season, it's not just the top speed. Top speed's one piece of it to maintain our speed qualities, but we want to monitor the team's workloads from a team standpoint, a positional standpoint, and an individual standpoint to make sure we're not redlining these guys too much, or that we're not underworking these guys too much in a week, to make sure that they're fresh and ready to go on Saturday. So those are the really important aspects to tracking that actually help us on the field.
Well, and I know, you mentioned you've been using it for 2 years now, but, many of us are impatient, right? And so like a coach who maybe just starts collecting data, would you tell them, look, you will get some of the results you're looking for right away? Or do you do you tell them you're going to have to practice a little patience here and build some things up? What would you tell them?
Yeah, I think the latter is very critical. The first, when we transitioned to KINEXON, really that first spring ball and that first camp was just accumulating data and setting up a system where in a timely fashion we can extract the data, assimilate the data, and then analyze the data. And so I didn't send anything to the coaches until that next camp. So it was probably 6 or 7 months of just accumulating data and familiarizing ourselves with the system, because the numbers are arbitrary and the numbers are just going to be what they are unless there's context behind it. And so patience is key to make sure that you accumulate data, understand what the data is, look at what a practice is, look what a whole spring ball is, what's a 24 period practice, what's a 12 period practice. So you have something to go off of eventually rather than just looking at arbitrary numbers. So I think patience is key with it. And just accumulating enough data to get your system in place first before you start sending stuff to coaches and making suggestions and changing things in the program. Just understanding the data first is going to be critical.
Well, you mentioned the coaches, and you have a new head coach in Jay Salvel. Now, he was in the program. He was the defensive coordinator. Now he moves over to the head coach position. But I'm just curious, is he on board with data, with GPS, LPS, all of it? Are you guys in sync?
There is a ton of alignment right now from the top down. And you could even throw our offensive coordinator, Coach Jay Johnson, who came over from Michigan State, in with that conversation as well. Very in tune with the data. I understand what Coach Salvel wants to accomplish during practice. He understands what our goal is by taking this information and giving it to the coaches. And so we have a strong alignment. He does listen. We do have a ton of conversations, formal and informal, on how the team's doing, what our numbers look like, how certain players are doing. And then the coaches are on board as well. And I think what's important whenever you approach coaches with data is that my approach has always been, I'm not telling you what to do. I'm just telling you what you're doing. And we're looking at things through a strictly physical lens, which is one important piece of the puzzle. There's also an emotional and mental side of the game. And from a schematic standpoint, there needs to be reps involved. And if a guy is fresh and he doesn't know what he's doing, he's not going to perform well Saturday. If he knows what he's doing and he's fatigued, he's not going to perform optimally either. So it's striking that balance and not overly freaking out over certain red flags and putting context behind the data, and then always approaching the coaches in a non-threatening way of, I'm not trying to step on people's toes. We're not trying to change practice. I want to give you objective information so you understand what your athletes are doing physically. And a lot of times what you'll see is a position coach says, man, like this guy, he just didn't have any pop today. His body language was bad. And then you go back and look at the numbers and it kind of justifies that. And so we want to always just give coaches information, objectively without emotion behind it and show them what they're doing, not necessarily always trying to tell them what to do. And it's not always a scenario where, the strength staff is always trying to cut back on practice. That can't be the case either, because then you just become the department that wants to trim practice, and that's not good. So there's a balance involved, and there's a way about articulating that information to the coaches in a way that this is collaborative. We're all pulling the rope in the same direction, and all we're trying to do is make sure we get to Saturday is explosive and fresh as possible, but also have the game plan and get the reps under our belt so that we can perform.
One of the other pain points we hear from the coaching side of it is, if I got something like that, I would never understand what any of that stuff meant. I would need somebody to do it. And we're just not a big enough program. We don't have the budget I can't go out and hire people to try and figure this stuff out for me. So I'm curious. I want to ask you, because, you're Wyoming, obviously not, you're not one of the biggest schools on the planet, but you're really doing so many great things, with what you have. I'm just curious, who is helping you? Do you have a sports data analyst? Did you have to find somebody? Do you do it yourself? How are you translating the data and explaining it to coaches? Who's helping you out?
Yeah, I guess, we're the sports scientists here. Everything is done through the sport performance staff. And I'll say this about the University of Wyoming. We've got a ton of support from the top down in terms of the resources they give us, in terms of the technology that they allot us. And so we're very fortunate here. Our goal is to make this department a Power 5 operation. And I think we're well on our way. We've got a 12,000 square foot weight room that's football only. We've got Elite Form on every rack. We've got force plates, Nord boards. We've got KINEXON, LPS, GPS. And so they allowed us all the technology to get our jobs done. But we are the sports scientists here. And really, I can, credit Coach Tommy Moffitt way back in the day, just baptizing me by fire with it. When I first started to getting into the tracking realm of sports performance, whether it was Catapult, Polar, or KINEXON, I didn't know what the heck I was looking at. And it was just trial and error and finding things that are valuable, finding metrics that are valuable, talking to a lot of people that are a lot smarter than me and getting information from them, and then just experience doing it. And I've been doing it for a long time. And so, the staff and I know what we want to look for. We've got a system in place, but we pretty much do it all ourselves, which, I value too, because we want to be proficient. This is kind of where the field's going. It's certainly not the end all be all of sports performance. It is a piece to it. And especially, I would say, in the last 4 to 5 years, this is the direction that sports performance is going. So for us to be well versed in putting the GPS on the guys, getting them back, uploading it, getting in a system where we can articulate the information and analyze the information, it's very valuable for us as coaches as well. It gives us a strong insight into our athletes, because we look at the GPS from the practice and then we lift them the next day. And so to not be siloed off by, well, this department does this and this department does this and this department does this, to have it a little more integrated by us doing it certainly helps us as well.
Well, now we reach the insights portion of the program, and you teed us up nicely by throwing the word insights in there in your last answer. And with you, I want to handle this a little bit differently, because when I listen to you speak, and and I've read some things about you, you have some terms that I think are very interesting, and I am just very curious to find out, are these old terms that you've maybe changed up a little bit with data, or were these terms that came out of using data? And the first one I want to throw at you is speed reserve. I've heard you talk about speed reserve. Can you explain what it is, and if there is a role that the data plays in it, what is that role?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a critical piece to our program here. Speed reserve ties into top speed ability. And really the best way I can describe our philosophy with that, and it's certainly not my philosophy, I think everybody has stolen things from other coaches that are a lot smarter than them over the years. This is a field of give and take. But speed reserve for us is increasing the top speed ability to make everything sub-maximal under it easier. And so if you look at a wide receiver, for example, most of our wide receivers can run 21 miles per hour plus. If we were to have a wide receiver that his top speed capability was 18 miles per hour, in general, the average operating speed of a receiver route to route is somewhere between 15 to 17 miles per hour. And so if my best capability, my max speed ceiling is 18, if I'm consistently asked to run 15 to 17, fatigue will set in over the course of a practice. Fatigue will set in over the course of a game just because it's harder for the athlete and they're closer to their capability. So if I can take that athlete and go from 18 miles per hour and I can raise his speed ceiling to 21 miles per hour, now 15 to 17, that's a jog in the park. And so you get a two-pronged approach. Everyone wants fast athletes. And it's the holy grail of athletic development. And so raising a player's top speed ceiling is good for performance, obviously, but it's also plays into conditioning because everything under that is sub-maximal is easier for the athlete. And so speed reserve is something that we consider in our conditioning. We're a speed-based program. We want to prioritize raising their ceilings as much as possible and then get them to apply that speed in sports context. But in order to get to that point in the first place, we need to raise their ceiling. And so that speed reserve is part of the conditioning that we consider in our program.
That's a great answer, and thanks for explaining that. And while we're on the subject of speed, something happened at the NFL Combine that I think shocked a lot of people. When Frank Crum, your 6'9", 315-pound offensive lineman, went out there and ran a 4.940. And I heard you talk. I've heard you talk about him before, but I'm curious. So when you got a guy that big and he's running that fast, and you got to go find the video, folks, because it is incredible if you have not seen it already. But Frank Crum runs a 4.940 at 6'9", 315. Do you use data in helping the big guys get a little faster as well? And did you with Frank Crum?
So our approach we call it the trenches, right? So you got the offensive and defensive line. Our approach is a more momentum-based approach than it is a top speed approach. Now, with Frank, you could see when Frank came in as a freshman, even when we would run some tempo runs with the big boys, the guy was just gifted with some really God-given athletic ability. And Frank was always the guy when we would do acceleration work, whenever we would do any type of running, any type of linear running, he would touch shapes and positions that you're not supposed to hit at 6'9", 315. So he's got some really good God-given athletic ability. And then you put some good training on top of that, obviously that helps that. With our big skill, we're more concerned with the 10 to 15 and our max acceleration, our speed at shorter lengths than the skill and the mid skill, and then the momentum that they're creating in 10 to 15 yards. And so we use a momentum calculation to say how much pounds of force are you producing at 5 yards, at 10 yards, at 15 yards. And for linemen, that's going to be really, really critical. Now, when you get to a pro day scenario or a combine scenario, then you need to start lengthening those guys out. But, Frank has some God-given athletic ability, and you put a sound training program on top of that. Frank came in at about 260 pounds, and I don't think he could bench 135 for 10. I think he'd be the first one to tell you that. So Frank worked his tail off for 5 years to put himself in that position. But the big skill will have a little bit different programming and a little bit different emphasis than the skill and the mid skill.
But before he goes to the combine, or any of your guys go to the combine, do you go back and look at the data on him, and do you use that as maybe a guide to set up maybe a different training program for them for the combine or a pro day?
Yeah, we do pro day training here. So we do combine prep here. We had 3 or 4 guys that stayed here and trained with us this past year, and so that training certainly is different than what you would say like a team off-season training program is. You already have the answers to the test. You've got to train for 6 things. And so the training does change. Now with Frank, looking at his data, we knew through his initial acceleration and then just looking at the biomechanics of how he runs and the shapes and positions that he was able to hit at his height, we knew he would run a really good 40. And what I told scouts was I expect him to run 5 flat. And I think he's going to surprise some people. Frank had hit 17 miles per hour in full pads pulling in practice. And so we knew that he had a strong capability to do that. And so looking at those things, you can start to make some inferences on what kind of 40 these guys can run. It's the same thing with our skill in the mid skill. You can look at certain fly 10s and certain splits at certain distances, and you can make some general inferences on the type of 40 that, or the range that they should be in when they actually run that 40.
Well, one of the other terms that I want to throw at you and see what type of insights maybe, having data and analytics provide is altitude. I mean, you're in the Mountain West Conference, and this is not something every team is dealing with. You already mentioned the elevation and the snow that you get, but I got to believe it affects the athletes, especially the freshmen who show up there, day one. Is there a role for data in that and helping the players adjust to the altitude?
Yeah, altitude's real. And I can tell you firsthand, coming from Baton Rouge, I was almost below sea level, and I could barely walk upstairs when I got here. And I'm getting old and I'm getting out of shape, but I don't think I'm that out of shape. So it's real. And, we have athletes that come in, especially as freshmen, from all over the country. We've got guys from LA, Texas, Nebraska, Wyoming, Philadelphia, the Midwest. And so all those athletes, especially you talk about the California kids, the Texas kids, those kids, they need to acclimate to it, and it's real. And so we certainly reduce the amount of volume and then the frequency at which they work out when they first get here. Our team, like our veteran main program, works out twice a day. They're running 5 days a week and they're lifting 4. And they can handle that because they're acclimated to it. With a freshman, they're going to work out once a day and they're going to run twice. They're going to lift 3 times. And so the frequency of what we're doing is significantly reduced. The amount of volume that we're doing is significantly reduced. And so you can look at those loads from our vets and what they would do on a normal Tuesday or a normal Thursday. And you can look at the loads that the freshmen are doing. And then just like anything else, you can slowly and safely progress them through the weeks. And then a lot of it's going to be the eye test and making sure that we safely train these guys and acclimate them in the right way. But altitude is 100% real, and it's something that we definitely have to take into consideration, especially with the freshmen coming in and then with transfers coming in mid-year. Some of those guys are modified as well.
But does it really help you to have that data in front of you to track the buildup and know when guys are progressing in the right direction?
Oh, it's huge. It's huge for us in the off season. To make sure, number one, that we're not starting too fast out the gate. And then number 2, that we're progressing the volume, whether it's the high speed yardage, whether it's the workload, whether it's the accumulation of XLs and decels, that we're progressing week to week in a 10 to 15% increase range. And we're not having these massive spikes where injury can happen or accumulated fatigue can happen for the following week. And so all those things are really, really critical to track. And then everything goes to the endpoint of our bandwidths and our thresholds that we want to touch during camp. And so with an 8-week summer training cycle, for example, you can start these guys at 40 to 50% of what a week would be, and then slowly make those jumps. 10% is kind of like the sweet spot. And I said 10 to 15, kind of around there, week to week. So we're not drastically increasing the workloads, the volumes in a way we're going to have some issues. And so that's been really, really good for us to have the end goal in mind, and then have an understanding of, from a rep standpoint, from a drill standpoint, how much we need to increase week to week to make sure we're doing it appropriately.
Well, you mentioned injury prevention, and I know that's a big part of what you're doing at Wyoming. And I'm just curious to find out from you, like, what other injury prevention insights have you been getting over the last couple of years?
Yeah, I think we can look at this past season and multiple examples from this past season. And, any strength coach that sits up here and says, I'm gonna prevent all injuries, he's lying. Okay, you can't prevent everything. But in general, injuries are going to happen from a drastic spike in volume or a drastic spike in intensity. And so those are the things that we want to try to avoid. And so if you look at last season, number one, you can look at our camp. We started our taper for Texas Tech about 2 to 3 days earlier than the year before when we played Illinois in 2022. So we started our taper 10 days out, and that really helped us making sure that we go into that Texas Tech game knowing what we're doing first and foremost, but that we're fresh because they were big and fast and they run up tempo offense, and we needed to be firing on all cylinders for that game, and we obviously were. So that certainly helped us. And then if you look at how we monitored the team, positions, and individuals throughout the season, the lowest game availability that we had last season was 94%. And the last 5 games of the year, we had 100% availability of our travel squad for those games. And so you rip off the last 3 games of the year, you rip off 3 wins in a row, as opposed to the year before you had 3 losses in a row. And so, availability is the best ability, and we got to have all of our bullets in our gun. So tracking these things throughout the season and communicating that with the coaches on who's high, who's low, what they did in the game. And then on our end, from a strength and conditioning staff, modifying the list based off of what these guys have done throughout the week certainly helped us this past year.
Well, and that's one thing I noticed since you've gotten there, Coach, is the strong finishes your team has. And you saw it even last year. I mean, you guys, like you just mentioned, you rip off wins at the end of the season. You're winning bowl games. You're getting the bowl games now, I mean, almost every single year. I mean, does it go back to everything that you've been learning over the years and applying the data and the analytics and, obviously gaining these insights? Does it go back to that, the way you structured this over the years? And do you change it from year to year?
Oh, I think it's a piece of the puzzle. It always starts with recruiting the right type of kids and recruiting certain type of athletes, and then it goes to the buy-in of the kids and how hard they work, and it goes to the coaching staff. And so, there's multiple aspects that go into that. For us specifically as a sports performance staff, our responsibility is to maximize every athlete's genetic potential and then make sure that they're ready for the demands that the coaches are going to put them through. And so when you look at our lane and what we do, the analytics has played a huge role in that, in being able to quantify it, knowing what the coaches are going to do with these athletes, knowing what the coaches want to do with these athletes, and then objectifying it and making sure that they're ready for that. So for our lane, it's been absolutely huge. And you look at the amount of soft tissue injuries that we've accumulated over the past 3 to 4 years, it's very minimal. Now, there's probably some luck involved with that. There always is with injuries. But to have an objective look at what they're going to do on the field and to be able to quantify it on a daily basis accurately, and to be able to progressively expose them to those things, that 100% helps us. We're not guessing anymore. And I don't want to guess with the training. I think if you looked at our program, there's a rhyme and reason for everything we do. I'm very type A. I got to know, to the yard, why we're doing something and what we're doing. And so that's really helped us in being able to prepare these athletes the right way so that the coaches can do what they need to do with them.
Well, one of the other interesting things I thought when I was listening to you talk is you can almost hear the insights coming out of the answers when you're talking about the data. And I picked up on this when you were talking about strength, power, and acceleration. And tell me if I get this, if I remember this correctly. But it's how you're in the weight room, right? And you got a player who's showing strength and power in the weight room, but and you'll go, well, yeah, that's great, but we need now to take that out onto the field and make sure that he can accelerate at a certain, to where we need him to be. And then basically there's power in numbers, right? You're using all 3 at the same time. Am I on the right track, Coach?
Yeah, with our off-season program, there's not a point in any workout, run or lift, that something is not being tracked and something is not being monitored. And the goal of the weight room is general. And really, I would say 95% of what we do is general. And so you look at the foundation of athletic performance, and that's going to start with a base of strength. And that strength base is more valuable for certain positions where you want more absolute strength. It's more optimal strength for other positions. Power is important to be able to display that strength fast. But ultimately, everything in the weight room has to transfer to the field, and it has to transfer to movement. And that's where I say we're trying to create bullets, not bowling balls. And certainly there's nuance in that depending on the position, whether you're talking about an offensive lineman or a wide receiver. But everything that's done in the weight room has to affect what they do on the field in a positive way. And so everything has to transfer to the field. And so strengths, that's good, that's fine. Power, that's great. If they don't have a certain movement quality on the field, and they're not able to accelerate, or they don't have a certain top speed threshold, if I'm a wide receiver or a defensive back, then it really doesn't matter. And so everything ties back to transfer to the field.
Well, the other thing I wanted to ask you too, when it comes to insights and insights and action, to me they kind of go hand in hand, because you see what you know what you learned, and then you obviously change something, or you add something, and put it into action. But your return to play program, and I know we've talked about injuries, and obviously you mentioned injuries do happen, but I know you're big on your return to play and your return to play program. If you can shed a little light on how you handle it at Wyoming.
Yeah, the return to play is handled by one of my assistants, Coach Connor Kane. He does a great job with it. And really, we're going to try to do as much work as we can around the limitation that those athletes have. But ultimately, the goal is to get them to a position where we feel physically, whether it's through the GPS and looking at what they're doing once they get to a running protocol, depending on the injury, whether it's looking at the force plates and looking at certain metrics that we need to return to baseline. All those things are going to be really important to us feeling comfortable with putting them back on the field and feeling comfortable that they're going to perform at the ability they had prior to the injury. And so Connor does a great job with that. I don't think we get too fancy with it. We try to work around the limitation that they have, whether it's an ankle, knee, it's a shoulder, whatever it is. Those guys are working out 6 days a week. In season, during every practice, they're in there lifting. Whether it's spring ball, they're lifting 3 days a week with the team, 3 days a week during practice. And, it's going to be based on the ranges of motion that they're allowed to get to. And then we'll look at what they're doing once they get to the running standpoint. Are they hitting close to 90% of their top speed that they hit prior? We'll look at the force plates, and we'll look at if there's any asymmetries, if it's a lower body injury. And then we'll look at certain metrics on the force plate as well to make sure that the outputs are going to come back fast. And then some of those eccentric metrics that are going to come back a little bit slower, we want to make sure those are in place before we feel comfortable that they're going to return back to what they were.
But does your return to play program play into your player availability at the end of the year? Being able to get guys back safely, but also maybe a little bit faster?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, the biggest indicator of injury is always going to be previous injury. And so if you take something as simple as a hamstring, making sure that we build back the general strength qualities that we need in the weight room, and then getting them back on the field running. And that's more with the sports medicine side. And Dave Kearns does a great job with that. And making sure we watch them from a mechanical and biomechanical standpoint, how they're running, and then looking at the data to see how fast they're touching compared to what they were hitting before. All those things play a role in getting them back safely, and more importantly, not having a re-aggravation of an issue. And that's usually what is going to happen. That's what we want to try to avoid. If we got a guy with a hamstring, we want to get that hamstring healed up, strengthened up, get them running back to what they were. And then we don't want that to be an issue anymore. And so that's where the return to play, and that's a collaboration with sports medicine, it really comes into play. So we don't have lingering issues that, okay, a guy's out for one game and then we have a reag and he's out for 3 games, then it becomes an issue.
Yeah. And this has been great, Coach. I mean, the everything, you're sharing with us, I really appreciate it. And I'm just curious, are there any other actions that or do you sit back some days and you think, man, oh man, if we didn't have the data to back this up, we may not have known that, or we may not have gotten him back, as quickly as we did, or any. Do you ever sit down and think about that? It's like, boy, oh boy, thank goodness we have this data, because if we didn't, we wouldn't have this.
I think that's a weekly thing. And that's off season and in season. You can look at, and our program ain't perfect. We've made mistakes. I make mistakes every day. I'm human too. And you look at something like, our top speed day, and we look at our high speed yardage progression, and did we lengthen them out too fast with the fly 10s, those kind of things. Do we need to pull back? Are our downloads really downloads? We load them week 1, 2, 3, and then we unload them that 4th week. Is that download actually a download? Because you got one shot at it. Those are things that we're constantly analyzing. And then in season, there's a ton of actions that take place in collaboration with the sport coaches. And I'll give you an example. This was week 3. We were playing Texas. And you got to always understand how coaches operate, and an OC and a DC are going to operate in terms of the amount of plays they're getting into practice. And so what we were seeing happen was we would have, an hour and a half practice on Wednesday, and then we'd have a hour practice on Thursday. But what was happening Thursday was everything was tempo, everything was long distance, everything was up speed. And so a lot of our receivers were touching the same amount of yardage in an hour practice than they were hitting in an hour and a half practice the day before. And so obviously we're trying to cram too much into a short period of time while the density rises. And so that's a twofold approach there. Not only is their yardage high, but the density at which they're running it is really, really high. And so that's a conversation we have with the coaches. We give them that information, and they can make the best possible decision for the team. And so those are things I wouldn't have known that without objective data. Technology and GPS and velocity-based training, like all that, it's really good. Nothing will ever replace a coach's eye. Nothing will ever replace a coach's intuition, because this is a human. This is a human career here, where you're dealing with humans and you're dealing with personalities and different types of athletes, and so this a lot of the time allows us to validate what we're seeing. But in a situation like that, I wouldn't have known that without the data. And to give those objective things to the coaches, they understand those things. And then it doesn't become opinionated from the strength coach, where I think they're doing this too much. Well, what do I know? I'm not a sports coach. Well, coach, here's the data, here's the yardage. I just want to show you what you're doing. And they can make the decisions that they need for there. And so there's a lot of times where we wouldn't have quite as accurate as a beat on what we're doing if we didn't have the objective information. So weekly we look at this stuff and we say, thank God we got this. So we're not guessing anymore, or we're not mindlessly conditioning these guys.
Well, you mentioned that Texas game, and T'Vondre Sweat, Texas's defensive tackle, they asked him at the NFL Combine, what was your toughest game? And Coach, you know the answer. He said Wyoming. And so, when you hear that, you got to know you're doing something right here, Coach.
Yeah, and I got to give credit to the type of athletes we bring in. You got to give credit to Joe Tripodi, our offensive line coach, who is absolutely incredible. And then the hard work of those young men, they get the credit for that. Like, the athletes get the credit for that. Their hard work, how they play, their character, their demeanor. We're going to live and die by the offensive line. That's what we do here at Wyoming. And so that's a critical piece to our offseason program, is making sure that those linemen are big, strong, explosive, and in the correct condition for what they have to do. So the trenches are a huge point of emphasis. When you look at how I lay my staff out, I've got 4 full-time assistant coaches for football. The offensive and defensive line each have their own strength coach. All the other strength coaches work with multiple positions. And so those positions are critical for us. I think they're critical for any team, but they're really critical for what we want to do here. And that's just a credit to them and the work they put in, how hard they play, and then the game plan that Joe Tripodi and Coach Bull put in for that game. They played incredible.
Yeah, but you're coaching them up and you're setting them up to win. Coach Donoval, if there's somebody out there who wants to reach out to you personally, what's a good way to get hold of you?
Yeah, you can find me on social media. I'm on Twitter. My DMs are open. I'm on Instagram as well. If anybody wants to reach out and try to link up on a call or something, I'm always more than happy to do that. I love chopping it up with other strength coaches and other people in this field. They can shoot me an email and we can exchange cell phones or whatever that may be. That's edonoval@uwyo.edu. But you can certainly find me on social media, on Twitter and Instagram as well.
Oh, I'm just glad you chopped it up with us today because this was outstanding. I really appreciate it, Coach. Thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, I appreciate the time, and we certainly appreciate the relationship we have with KINEXON and you and Jeff Dillman and Chris White. And it's a great working relationship, and we certainly appreciate everything you guys do for us as well.
Well, that's very kind of you to say. Hey, if you know a great coach who's out there doing great things, winning games and doing it with sports data and analytics, we would love to hear about them. We may even ask them to be a future guest on this very podcast. You can find us on Twitter and Instagram at KINEXON Sports, or look for us on LinkedIn at KINEXON Sports and Media. Remember, we want you to innovate the game by collecting the data, getting those insights, and turning those insights into action. We will see you next time.